told that it rains in Oxford, but I know that it doesn't rain on the Skoll World Forum. Did you see the mobile phone clip that Molly Melching showed yesterday of the 4-year-old reading? Did you see that? And did you see the delight on everyone's face when he pulled it off? That's how I feel about the Skoll World Forum. It makes me want to dance, and I don't dance. There shouldn't still be injustice and poverty and violence and inequity and untreated diseases and humans in cages and children who can't go to school and music fallen silent. We shouldn't be exiled from the place where these things are solved forever. And you were issued a challenge last night. Muhammad Yunus asked you to imagine social fiction. He asked you to posit a world with a poverty museum, a world in which Jeff's antiquarian arms dealer is unworldly and avuncular and wears slippers, a world in which artists are right and policymakers are wrong. And Jackie Novogratz asked you to imagine a world based on dignity. And Richard Jefferson challenged you to imagine a world in which the problem was problem solving. And Sal Khan suggested that flogging a dead horse didn't scale. And Sally Osberg reminded you that for the first time in a few billion years, we're in charge of the planet, for better or worse. And I have absolute confidence that you are up to these challenges, and that the project we represent, this imagination in exile, will come home. Meanwhile, there is work to do. And work is what we do at the Skoll World Forum, even when we're eating and drinking and talking and hugging and applauding and dancing and connecting and convening and celebrating and disrupting. And Robert Fogarty has been working all week. I know for certain he was working in the green room of the plenaries and in the garden marquee. And there's a rumor that he's been working hard overnight. He's a photographer who understands that we don't know on others' behalf, but that others know on our behalf. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Robert to you this evening. Robert.
My name is Robert Fogarty, and I take pictures. But they aren't just any pictures. In my project, Dear World, I ask people to share one message to someone or something that they care about. They started as love notes to New Orleans. And over the past 3 years, I've had the opportunity to look into the eyes of thousands of people who shared their hopes, their fears, their losses, and their regrets. I consider each portrait a gift to each of us. And I'll never forget the moment that I realized this, when a grown man with tears in his eyes stood in front of me. His wife uncovered his bare chest and revealed the words, "Cancer-free." Your words are your gifts. I hope that people realize that we all have voices and that we all have stories to tell. And in this room, you're sitting alongside some of the most beautiful, booming voices that this complicated, mysterious, and big world has. We're the lucky ones, because it's in rooms like these where people come together to do things we initially imagined would never be possible. Wonderful collaborations often start in settings like these. Genuine smiles and hellos are really important currency. After all, strangers here are really just new friends in disguise. As social entrepreneurs, you chase that pit of your stomach feeling, that wake up today and feel it in my bones sense of purpose, sense of place. Butterflies, there are indicators of our North Stars. And they won't be found if we don't challenge ourselves. Dare to imagine the world that you want. Dare to imagine the world that you need. Dare to imagine a world that you want your kids to see. I'm now going to show you portraits of hundreds of people, all of whom are in this room. I want to thank you all for your words, your gifts, and for everyone who wasn't able to participate. As you watch your fellow Skoll World Forum participants go by, realize that it is still a wonderful time to reflect. Thank you so much.
poorest and most vulnerable people in the world may have no greater friend than our next speaker. Kofi Annan has worked tirelessly on behalf of world stability and human rights for over 50 years. As Secretary General of the United Nations, he was a driving force for peace, development, and good governance across the globe. One of his greatest legacies may be the introduction of the Millennium Development Goals, creating the first global blueprint for the eradication of poverty. In addition to his work to achieve a fairer, more secure world with the Kofi Annan Foundation and the elders, today he chairs the Africa Progress Panel, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, and is a board member of the United Nations Foundation and numerous organizations working towards social justice. He is an accomplished diplomat, an inspired mediator, a champion for the underserved, a Nobel Peace Laureate, and as of last year, a best-selling author. Please welcome Kofi Annan.
Thank you, Jeff, for those kind words and warm introduction. When I arrived, Sarah Borgman, the director of the forum, met me and gave me this and said, "This is yours, but you don't have to wear it." Implying everybody will know you. You have to be careful because let me tell you a story. When I stepped down as Secretary General, I realized how tired I was, and so my wife, Nan, and I decided we're going to take about 3 months off. We borrowed a friend's house in the Como region in Italy, and I decided we didn't want television, radio, or newspaper. After 6 weeks of this, I had become very bored. So I said, let's go and get a newspaper. We walked into a shop, and within seconds, a group of men standing at the right-hand corner were staring at us, and one of them broke away and made his way towards us. I turned to Nan and said, "Gosh, we have 6 weeks to go, and we have already blown our cover. How are we going to manage the village?" By then, the man was on top of me, and he put out his hand and said, "Morgan Freeman." "May I have an autograph?" And I said, "Sure." So I signed K. Freeman. He was very happy, trotted off. And we were also very happy. We could continue our holidays incognito. But indeed, it is a pleasure to be here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the forum and all that has been achieved over the decade. Let me start by thanking Jeff and Sally, not just for their invitation today, but also for creating this global hub for innovation and social entrepreneurship. The unique opportunity you have provided has created a powerful living community where ideas are shared and developed, and optimism and creativity are nurtured. In countries across the world, we can see the concrete benefits of these collaborations. But I believe as important as these real improvements on the ground has been the evidence you have provided of how cooperation, courage, and the disruptive power of innovation can help change the world. Today, I would like to talk briefly about the critical importance of continuing to harness these qualities at a global level. Ladies and gentlemen, I know and I accept that as someone who has spent his entire career at the United Nations might not be seen as the most obvious person to convey this message. After all, the UN hardly enjoys reputation of innovation and dynamism. Indeed, it is widely perceived to be bureaucratic and reluctant to change rather than being ahead of the curve. Such a view, however, ignores both the way the UN has adapted to new challenges and the vision and inventiveness of those who built the organization that I was later privileged to lead. The establishment of the United Nations itself was an extraordinarily innovative and bold response to the horrors of world war and genocide. But from its earliest days, the UN has also been shaped by visionary thinkers in the field of law, human rights, and economics who believed, as you do, that our world can be changed for the better. Ralph Bunche, a major architect of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was, for example, a champion of equal rights for every individual at the UN for 25 years. Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General, revolutionized the UN's role and approach to armed conflict. Peacekeeping was not a mission originally within the UN's remit, but he understood the moral imperative and crucial need for these responsibilities to be added, and he battled for them, and they were. Peacekeeping is just one example of how the United Nations has adapted and grown to further human security, protect human rights, and promote development. In more recent times, it has also had to respond to great challenge and change. I took over the role of Secretary General not long after the end of the Cold War, where initial optimism about peace dividend had given way to new divisions and uncertainty. New civil wars and local conflicts led to an explosive demand for peacekeepers. Painful lessons had to be learned from the horrors of Rwanda and Srebrenica. There were increased concerns over what have been called problems without borders, challenges so large that no country, however powerful, could tackle on its own. The threat posed by climate change to our way of life, our planet, and future generations became clearer and more acute. And since I was talking to UN leadership who have shown vision, we have two here in the room. Dr. Brundtland, who when she was Executive Director of World Health Organization, was perhaps the first head of a UN agency to declare a travel ban when SARS hit. She knew how dangerous it was, and given the way we were traveling, how people could be hit. And I know when she said we should impose a ban, not many people thought it was possible, but she did, and it was respected. And Mary Robinson, who's been here, was one of those who was pushing to mainstream human rights and gender within the UN. And so you can find innovators in strange places. The full tragedy of the HIV/AIDS epidemic was having a catastrophic impact on entire regions, particularly in Africa. We saw a continuing rise in the reach and impact of international crime and the proliferation of weapons. Globalization accelerated, bringing new prosperity, but also greater inequality and social problems in its wake. The changes, of course, were not all negative. We had the benefit of new technologies, which provided new ways of connecting, informing, and engaging people. Civil societies were becoming more active, robust, and influential across the globe. We saw an increased understanding that in an interconnected world, our futures and fortune were linked as never before. This fueled a growing determination from individuals, businesses, and organizations to look beyond narrow self-interest. Faced with these changes, I felt we had the opportunity to recast and strengthen the UN's role and approach. So we deliberately sought to refocus our efforts on the well-being of citizens, of the individual, rather than just states, and to build wider partnerships with the private sector, academia, and civil society. The Global Colloquium, just to give a few examples, the Global Colloquium of University Presidents, for example, brought together UN staff and leading academics, tapping into the intellectual firepower of the finest scholars and matching it with experience on the ground. Each year, the benefit of this inclusive approach is reflected by the Skoll Forum, which brings new ideas and innovative social entrepreneurs to one of the world's oldest educational institutions. Through the Millennium Development Goals, political leaders across the world agreed for the first time to put poverty eradication at the top of the international agenda through ambitious and measurable targets. Not all the MDGs will be met by the target date of 2015. We need intensive efforts to close the gap where needed and construct ambitious but realistic agenda for post-2015 and beyond. The MDGs have also been the catalyst for remarkable progress in tackling poverty and its causes. The UN's Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria is another example of how building the widest coalitions and innovative thinking over funding have had a major impact. And of course, we've raised billions to support the fund, but we also got in-kind contributions. For example, I recall a meeting Group Brundtland, myself, Peter Piot, had with the chairman of the 7 largest pharmaceutical companies, pleading with them to reduce the cost of medication, to make it affordable to the poor. At that time, the cost of the medication was $15,000 a year, and how poor people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America could afford it was unimaginable. And I recall the meetings when some of the chairmen said, well, we don't know why we are here. We may be accused of price fixing. I said, no, price fixing means collusion to maximize your profits. Here, we are asking you to lose money, to cut your prices. The other said, my lawyer is not here. But the end is, but they did it. In the end, we had it at 15,150. And yesterday I was informed South Africa now says it can produce it for $80 a year. That is a remarkable progress, particularly when you consider that at the time we met them in Amsterdam, the pharmaceutical company was suing Nelson Mandela in South African court for threatening to use compulsory licensing to produce generic version of the medication. So I told them, I'm not a public relations expert. But if you sue Nelson Mandela on an issue like HIV/AIDS in a South African court, if you lose, you lose. If you win, you lose and lose and lose. In the end, they settled it out of court, which was very good. And I think also let me continue, in the area of extending the rule of law, we have made quite a lot of progress. Here again, public pressure to end impunity for the worst crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, helped persuade governments to act through the UN, setting up the regional tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and eventually the International Criminal Court. So what have I learned from my time at the United Nations? First, every new idea and initiative meets with resistance. It was perhaps no surprise that there were reluctance and resistance to some of the changes that I've discussed here from member states. But on occasion, the resistance could come from my own staff, aware of the challenges we face and eager to protect me from criticism and disappointment. Who would you try to discourage, and whom would you encourage to move forward? And in bureaucracies, you have to be careful. When it comes to change, it is remarkable the restraints bureaucrats can put on themselves. This will never work. It's never been done before. The governments will never accept it. The board will never agree. And my response always was, let's try, let's test it, let's push the envelope. You never know. And we have to be prepared to find the courage to take risks, even to fail, if the goal is worthwhile. And we must also remember that when you're pushing change and reform, it takes time. Reform takes time. I recall when I first launched the reform at the UN, after 16 weeks, somebody managed to get a piece in the New York Times that I had not reformed the UN. And that day I was having lunch with the Security Council, and I apologized to the council members for my failure to reform the United Nations in 6 weeks flat. And Sergei Lavrov, who is today the Russian foreign minister, who was then the Russian ambassador, looked up and said, "Mr. Secretary General, what are you complaining about? You've had more time than God had to create the world." And so I looked at him and said, I agree, Mr. Ambassador, but God had a unique advantage. He worked alone. And without the Security Council. I would also suggest that the more people we can involve in coming up with solutions and the bigger coalitions we can build for change, the greater the chance of success. No one has monopoly of wisdom. When our challenges ignore both national and international borders, so must we. We have to do more to break down barriers between different sectors, different academic disciplines, and for countries to open themselves to new ideas and collaborations. And third, I have learned that with determination, inventiveness, and close collaboration, we can overcome the biggest barriers and toughest resistance. For ladies and gentlemen, this is just as well. It would have been nice for me to end my remarks by saying that the challenges we face today are fewer or smaller than when the forum started 10 years ago. But as you know, it would not be true. Nearly 1 in 7 of the world's population will go hungry today. We have abjectly failed to respond to the scale and urgency of the climate change crisis. In the last few years, a savage economic and fiscal crisis has sent unemployment soaring and widened inequalities in many parts of the world. We are in danger of leaving terrible legacy to future generations. That is why that is why I'm here to challenge you to do even more. We need you. We need you as well as your individual and collective inventiveness to help build and lead the coalitions necessary to challenge our leaders to face up to their responsibilities. Individuals and people have power. They don't always realize it. And we have to accept, let me state that when leaders fail to lead, the people can make them follow. And so as individuals, there's much more we can do that we are not always aware. Business as usual is not an option. We need nothing less than radical shift to a new model of sustainable development. It is a model which must be built on three essential pillars: peace and security, development, rule of law, and respect for human rights. For there can be no long-term development without security, and there can be no long-term security without development. And no nation can long remain prosperous without respect for rule of law and human rights. Strengthening these pillars requires us to see sustainable development not just as sustained growth, as the global goal. It needs us to stop seeing development assistance as the rich giving a handout to the poor and put in place a genuinely universal compact where we can work together to increase incomes and opportunity for all. We have to be open and open up decision-making, ensuring that it is more transparent, more accountable, and enjoys far wider participation. It means accelerating the switch from business models based on shareholder value to ones which look to the interest of wider stakeholders. We must and we have to change our default position from damage control to investing in resilience and prevention, tackling the root causes of problems rather than simply responding to emergencies. And crucially, we have to have the confidence to expand much more rapidly what we have seen and know works. So we must make every effort to scale up your ideas along with your energy and optimism. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't doubt the difficulty of the task or underestimate the barriers to success. But I'm more than ever confident about our capacity to change our world for the better. And this optimism is only increased when I look around this room. Thank you all for what you've done and for all that you will achieve in the future. Thank you very much.
Leadership is, to quote the management literature, a contested category. To quote Jacqueline Novogratz, who's a much better writer than the management literature, it is a sacred trust. Our panel this evening understands how important that trust is, and our moderator has provoked and entertained us at the Skoll World Forum before. Ray Suarez is the doyen of public service broadcasters. And public service, like social entrepreneurship, is what it's all about. Ray will lead our last panel discussion with his inimitable brand of inspired followership. Ray Suarez.
Thank you. Let me bring out our panelists. I direct you, of course, to the speakers' bios in the conference handbook to get the full story on our panelists. They are Lydia Wilbard of Camfed. Lydia Wilbard from Camfed, the Campaign for Female Education. Vera Cordeiro, founder of Saúde, Criança, Brazil Child Health. Gro Harlem Brundtland, former head of the WHO, former Prime Minister of Norway. And Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. What a panel. The Power to Lead is one of those session titles that sounds like it was computer generated. If there was something called a conference organizer app, you might just have it spit out names of panel discussions and come up with the Power to Lead. But, you knew there was a but coming. If you pull it apart, I think the real strength comes from its main component pieces, power and lead. And take a look at this panel, which in ways large and small has pushed back against the constraints of old thinking, pushed back against the predictable, pushed back to unlock the power of those they lead. Power and leading are probably used very differently, let's say, by Kim Jong-un's cabinet from the way our panelists would use those two terms. So let's begin. Does the power to lead first have to run up against the power of no? No is one of the most powerful forces going in the world because everything that's going wrong in today's world has somebody who's willing to defend it. Perhaps not overtly, but defend the status quo, defend the way we've always done things, defend the way things are, say it's too soon, don't move too fast, it's too expensive, it's too, so no. The power to lead means beating the power of no, doesn't it, Lydia?
Yes.
Tell us how.
Yes. No. No, it's too risky to take a girl to school. No, it's not safe there. No, we do not have enough for the family. We can't afford this for the girl. So I work with an organization which pushes an agenda, which looks for an opportunity for the girls to be in class. And you must know, all of you, that it's not easy. It hasn't been easy over the years. And these girls that we work with, they have faced a lot of no's in their lives. Almost everyone has told them, no, it is not possible for you. So my role and my job in Camfed, Tanzania, it's breaking the no's. It's, if you call the term disruptive, I don't know if I get it right. I wish I can have a Swahili word. But it's disrupting the no's and the valleys and mountains that these girls and young women in rural communities of Africa face. The no's that they hear from everybody, that you cannot do it, you are not going to afford, you are not going to be able to sustain, you are going to be too late, it is too late for you to be able to be in class. So I think this is the no's that we are talking about. So my power to lead
if
also
I understand
comes
you,
from,
it's not district commissioners of education, it's not ministers in Dar es Salaam, it's the people themselves who've already internalized being turned down, being turned back so many times that you have to use your power to make them believe in themselves again.
Exactly. It's the circumstances that has put the no's in front of them. So I have to use the power to create that, to break that, for them to see the way and the room, to provide the resources for them to be able to break that, the no's.
Vera, Brazil, one of the fastest growing economic powers in the world, about to take the world stage again with two big parties, with the World Cup and the Olympics, yet at the same time, one of the most unequal societies on the planet. And there are probably a lot of people who figure that one day the problems you see every day will just sort of get taken care of. But you want to take care of them now.
Yes. You know, as a doctor working during 20 years in a public hospital, I realized that the work we did there had its limits. And I have to go beyond the hospital walls to create a new paradigm of health, you know. Just to give you two examples. One day I was in the pediatric department in Rio de Janeiro, and my job was to tell to Pedrina's son, a 3-year-old boy, that he has to amputate his hand to continue to be alive. And I had also to explain to his mother that he has to cut his hand. And she said to me, to my surprise, she said to me, Vera, I understood, but do you have a job for me? Because after that amputation, I will go to the street to beg for money. Do you have a job? See, with no answer, I stopped it. Then I tried to rethink about our work inside the hospitals. Then in the same week, a mother that has a child, 2 years old also, you know, she said to me, my daughter, she has a problem, she cannot digest her food. So, and the milk is very expensive. I'm not able to raise her. Can you take her at your home and you raise her? She was giving her daughter. And I said, my goodness, one has no job. The other one cannot afford to raise the daughter. What's the role of the physician, nurses, you know, not only us, but the health system, not only in Brazil, but all over the world. So I start, you know, thinking that I have to create something new, not to replace the government, but to make sense what the government does inside. But I have no idea. We started in a stable where the horses used to be, from scratch. I have no power like both of them. So no money at all in a stable. And started, but I knew I wanted to change the world. And I knew I was a doctor that wanted to fight poverty. And from a very humble place, then this vicious cycle, poverty, hospitalization, rehospitalization, that we want to break, we did that through that organization.
I'm guessing there was no lesson in medical school about what to do with someone who realizes they can't earn a living once you save their life by taking their hand off. You had to be inventive beyond the limits of your education. How'd you do that?
I mean my formal education in my house?
Well, in medical school, there's probably no lesson on what to do when a mother gives you a child.
Yes. I think is that the most disruptive time of my life. Because to start, I remember myself and a group of volunteers in the middle of the stable where the horses used to be, and think to myself, who am I? You know, I used to be a traditional physician, and now I'm ruffling things to my house to do what I have no idea what it will become. And that transformation from a doctor to a social entrepreneur, and I have to thank Ashoka, because we have no money, and Ashoka said, you are not crazy. Of course I am crazy, but you are not crazy. You are a social entrepreneur. So I think this madness has a name. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And after when the Skoll Foundation appeared in my life, Avina and Schwab, and all those marvelous institutions, I say, whoa, this madness can be scalable, you know, we can scale. So that's wonderful time.
They're reassured that this madness does have a name, so it's good. You've had a very different experience from our other panelists, but I'm sure no fewer number of times where people have said, oh, we can't do that. Can you think of a time where you have had to say, well, we're going to do it?
Yeah. Well, I can think of many times. You know, Kofi Annan was mentioning when we had this terrible pandemic, SARS, spreading. As we started scared about what in fact was happening out far east with my staff in that weekend, and I said, well, we have to be able to stop this because already it had spread from one country to a couple of others. And people were dying, at least 10%, maybe 15% of those who got them. So I said, you know, we have to be able to find a way to stop the spreading of this disease because it will cross across the world. It had already come to Canada. So my staff said, yes, but it's very hard, you know. It's not possible, that's like you say. We can send warnings about this disease spreading. And I said, but those warnings have to be so strong that people don't enter planes from the places where this disease is already there, so that we risk spreading it across the world. They said we couldn't, it had never been done, that WHO sent travel recommendations, which we then, and I know I was lucky because I had been Prime Minister. And I knew that there was no other institution in the world that could do something which was new and different, in something where we early could be able to stop something that could be really dramatic. And I think because I had been Prime Minister, I dared to say to my staff, no one else can do it. We are the only institution that has the authority in principle that we can say this is what the world has to do. So, you know, and they were impressed. Is it possible? They were scared. But we did it.
I would have loved to have been on the other extension when the Chinese got that call. Not an easy call to make.
No,
you knew it was the right call,
yeah.
But you knew that there were a lot of people who were going to say, she can't do that.
There was a lot of opposition.
Yeah.
But in 4.5 months, that whole global danger was over. The last case was contained, and the thing was gone from the surface of the earth.
Mary Robinson, as High Commissioner for Human Rights, you probably ran into people who said you can't do that enough times to fill a book, which indeed you have. Yet, like Prime Minister Brundtland, you have to believe that you've got enough people behind you that your yes means something to their no, don't you?
Yeah. But before I answer, and I will, of course, you know, the power to lead, it's for women in the 21st century. That's good. You know, that's already. But I learned a lesson very early in life when I got a big no from my own society that helped me a lot when I was High Commissioner, and I'll just tread it through very quickly. I was elected to the Senate in Ireland at the age of 25, and I really had an agenda to open up and liberalise Ireland, starting with legalising family planning. And this was late 1970, early 1971. Mm-hmm. And I got 2 male senators to join with me, and we tabled a bill in the Parliament to amend the criminal law, where it wasn't against the law to use a condom, but it was against the criminal law to either buy or sell a condom. And married women could only avail of the contraceptive pill if they had a prescription from their doctor that they had a cycle regulation problem. Mm-hmm. And it must have been the Irish weather, but there were an awful lot of married women with cycle regulation problems. And so for me, you know, a law graduate, etc., this was a simple thing to do. I completely underestimated the response from Irish society at the time. I was denounced from pulpits, I got hate letters, and I wobbled, actually. I mean, I was really scary because I was used to being admired and being bright and, you know, achieving, etc. And suddenly, even walking down the main street in Dublin, Grafton Street, I thought people were going to jump out and say, "You are the devil incarnate, I hate you," because this is what the letters were saying. And I learned that it's not so easy to change deep traditional aspects. And so when I served as High Commissioner for Human Rights, I would get ministers saying, "Your rights are Western rights, they're not our rights. We have different," and it was very, very important. We have our own culture. And it was very important to distinguish between culture, which is extremely important, and in fact human rights should be embedded in the culture of countries and strengthened by that. But then there are things called culture, which are not necessarily and shouldn't be called culture, and they are traditional practices that are harmful. One of them, which the elders, which Gru and I are, we're the younger elders, but we're, early child marriage is often thought of as being cultural in some communities. It's our culture. The average age of marriage is 12 here in the Bihar province of India, where we were, or the Bihar state, or in the Amhara region in Ethiopia. But actually, it's not something that we can kind of say it's cultural and we can't do anything about it. On the contrary, it's a traditional practice which happens to be harmful. Slavery was a harmful practice, and apartheid was a harmful practice. But the way to change it is something that I learned. You have to change it from within and over time, and work at it, and work at gentle cutting, as some very good people here do, and work but at the same time you have to be very clear. And that was a very early lesson that it took about 10 years for the law to change in Ireland, and for people to accept and even to discuss sexual relations, use of condoms, etc. It was really tough. So I was very glad that I had that early no, that I had a kind of shock no, because it was so severe. And afterwards to realize that change of that kind has to happen from within, the whole village, the whole community, as we're learning in Girls Not Brides, the elders, the global partnership which we've helped to bring together. And you know, it's the courageous leaders in a village. And sometimes it's the imams, sometimes it's the mothers, sometimes it's the girls themselves. Gru and I were in a school in Bihar in India, and the girls were actually negotiating with their parents to stay an extra year in school. You know, imagine negotiating when they would go round to a girl's house if she heard a rumor or there were whispers, and she would call her friends around to say, "Look, she's only 13. Could she stay until she's 14 or even 15? And you know, that takes a lot of courage to change the norms that are traditional practices that are harmful. But it seems as if you're changing something very, very fundamental.
But I'm glad you told that story, because part of the power to lead comes from not just speaking for yourself, doesn't it? I mean, you're the sharp end of the spear, but you've got a lot of people behind you who want this thing to happen, and you're the face of that morning, in that meeting, in that conference. But you're not just there batting for yourself. You're leading, but you got to have people behind you. How do you get them? You started, a great many good things have started in stables, but there you were, and you started by yourself, but eventually Saúde, Criança is moving all over the country. It's a spreading movement. Camfed and Kama, its alumni group, spreading throughout East Africa. There has to be a story between I'm standing here by myself and I'm standing here for millions. How do you make that journey? How do you make that work as a leader?
Let me tell two stories that, you know, I think is a two-way road. We work with a lot of volunteers. And normally they used to say, today is not my day to be here, but can I stay here today? This is the only place that my life makes sense. Because I believe we all have happiness if you understand that we are all linked. So the volunteers, we joke that we economize in Prozac. because, you know, they understood very quickly the need to be there. They are not there because they are good persons. Of course they are good persons, because they earn. And what they earn, they don't earn money. They earn values. They transform. Listen to the heroic mothers that they work with HIV and many children ran inside the house, you know, with a full catastrophe. So the volunteers stop complaining about her life, and they change their life, and they are more powerful to be happy. That's a kind of talk about happiness, you know. And I have two stories very quickly to tell you, because from the mothers we have a lot of energy. One day, Saúde, Criança was receiving an award in Rio, and we recognized among the 7 awardees one of our mother there that passed through the program. And that kind of things, the award she received means a lot for us, you know, more than the award that we were receiving that night. Because what she did after the program, she was able to found a favela inn, is a hostel for foreign people, and she was able to manage. And she was receiving the same award that we were receiving. So it's, my goodness, that's the real award. So that's.
Yeah, so for me, I think people live by examples. They live from what they see. So for me to draw people to support me, to push the agenda for the breaking the barriers that the girls face, it's the culture that I create with the examples, the culture of listening, the culture of sharing with the stories, the culture that I also acquire from the people that I see leading. So I have this story. I happened to win a scholarship to study in the United States at Johns Hopkins. And here I am a girl from, you know, rural Africa in Dar es Salaam, where English is not actually the first language. And I find myself in the middle of the United States at one of the big universities and full of technology, things that I wasn't aware of. But this openness that I got from the academic advisor direct from the first place, the culture that she created for me to be able to knock even without appointment, I think that's what I learned from leaders, and that's what I try to create within the organization. So I have this responsibility of making sure that I act as an example, that people that look at me, that I share the stories, they are able to acquire what I aspire. So the culture of listening, the culture of sharing stories of the girls, to me, it has worked very well. I attend 11 government bodies at the national level, where I have a room to share stories, to create an understanding of what it would take for a girl to be able to stay in school and finish school. So people live by examples, and like you can achieve a lot from, you can gain support from people when you create that environment where people can actually learn from what you are doing.
Sending girls to school, making sure poor people don't die from curable disease, having children not die for want of $2 worth of medicine, stopping people killing each other. Nobody gets up in any responsible public forum and argues against any of these things. Nobody says, oh, I'm for uneducated girls. I'm for dead children. Yet, this is still a struggle. Why is it still a struggle?
Because of inequity. I mean, when you look at the world, the gaps are so large. And in most countries, people live together in a society, but they live at very different levels of standard of life. You know, and it's not only the very poor compared to the super rich, but there are layers of big unfairness and injustice. So unless you make policies inside countries and between countries, as Kofi Annan was asking for at the global level, there is no way to give that necessary investment and right to each person. For health and education, for instance, if you don't have a society that's willing to share, and where you have, you know, the courage to tax people, to have them show the necessary willingness to share. So I get very frustrated sometimes when I hear people complaining about a country that is so much poorer than another country, but inside that country there are a few people who work hard to make the changes that we did in our countries when we were poor and before we saw to it that there is the right to school, there is the right to health for everyone. And you have to redistribute income, power, opportunities to make a decent society.
That's disruption, all right. I mean, if we're talking about, as we have all week, disruption. Disruption is the wrecking ball that you have to swing against inertia, because it's inertia that keeps millions of girls illiterate. It's inertia that keeps poor people sick in places they don't have to be sick, in societies that are rich enough for them not to be sick. It's inertia that let you, President Robinson, not even see certain populations in countries you were there to visit. Yet, we still have a habit of using disruption as a bad word to describe a bad set of circumstances. How do you, can we rehabilitate disruption and embrace it instead of fearing it?
There's another disruption that I'm increasingly passionate about now, and that is the link between human rights, climate change, and the sort of injustice of the way that climate is undermining very poor livelihoods. And yet we have a lot of people denying that there's a problem or not wanting to look at this as being a problem about people. There's a really big barrier to, for example, in the United States, getting a debate about this that we urgently need. And part of it is the corruption of money. It's, you know, the amount of money that's going into bad science. It's a little bit, to me, like the tobacco issue. I think that, in a way, fossil fuel is almost like the tobacco of the 21st century, because it's going to cause these emissions, it is causing them, that are causing climate shocks in countries in Africa, in small island states, and the extent of that problem. We need a huge disruption. We need a climate awakening that will shake us out of our complacency or out of our inertia, or whatever it is. And it's of such huge importance.
Have you been disruptive? And tell me how. Tell me, because I keep hearing it. It's dropped like sweet and low around here this week, if any of you are still using it. Disruption is this sort of valorized word. And when I disrupt meetings and disrupt staffs at work and stuff like that, people get mad at me. But I'm learning that I'm supposed to think it's a swell thing. What is it about it that works, and how does it work?
When you talk about why children are dying all over the world, why women are not able to go to school, I think we have to think about the culture. We live in such a materialistic culture, all over the world, and it's very hard to go out of the status quo. And I think one of the disruptions I did in my life, I still remember in the very beginning, I started to raffle things off my house, My husband used to travel all over the world with the IBM, he worked for IBM. And I remember I couldn't see my two girls, 10 and 13 years old at that time, having everything, And then the other day in the hospital, a mother giving a child for me. So I started raffling things off my house. And I still remember my daughter saying, "No, my Japanese dolls, no, mother, please." And they locked because they know I was totally mad. But I have no money, even my friends, when I called them, they knew that I didn't want to go to the cinema. I needed their money, their energy. So they didn't call me back again. So I think we have to have courage to go out of the status quo. As Yunus says yesterday, that he believes in a world without poverty, that poverty will be in a museum. I truly believe in that, but I think we have to change inside, because people, they feel afraid of moving from the status quo. But as Dalai Lama said one day, if he was very selfish, he will be a very lovely person. He will take care of others because they want to be happy. So when you are able to go out of the status quo, there's no end. It's a path with no end. You go on, you go, like all the audience here.
I think for me it's going beyond what we see and asking the why. So like you said, I get so frustrated when people will be there blaming, girls not attending. Sometimes they come to us to say, oh, some of the girls that you are supporting in school fees, they are really not, they are not attending school. I think we should change the method of selecting them. Maybe they don't want to school. I get so frustrated. You have to go beyond why she's not attending in spite of, being able to get the support. There is something behind that. Maybe she's going through other difficulties that we are not able to interrupt. Maybe she does not even have the motivation because she has received a lot of no's in between. So for me, it's more of understanding beyond what we see to be able to interrupt something that we want to push. So I wanted to tell a story of a girl. And some of the girls that we are working with, they are really coming from the vulnerable environment. And sometimes I consider disruptive to be either positive or negative. So I would say the girls that we are working with, they actually have faced a lot of disruptions in a negative way. And so here is a girl who lost a mother when she was 10 years old. She had a very hard-working father, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to provide enough for her to be in school. She happened to be fortunate to attend secondary school, and she worked very hard. She passed, so she were to go to high school. And because she understood that the father is not going to be able to provide, because as you go up, the cost of education becomes higher. So she opted to go to a fishing camp, where she's going to work for an auntie who has business of fishing. After some time helping, worked very hard with a hope that an auntie is going to provide for education by the time she's going to school. So here the time comes, she's not able, the aunt comes with an excuse, accusing that this girl has stolen the money. So the money is missing in the house. And she has been accused of, being responsible for this. So imagine in a moment that with all the hope that she had, it was relying on this auntie, and now it turns out that she's being accused of the money. What do you think this girl would do? Stop there? What?
No.
And that girl is me.
Oh, yeah.
So it's this courage and life experiences that sometimes they inform our programs, our way of working. Because it takes an understanding of what circumstances that some of these girls that we support, they will go through. So someone will come and blame, she's not attending, she didn't do this, but the circumstances that these girls and young women that face in the journey of education, it's huge and mountains. So as a director of Camfed Tanzania, and as a vision that Camfed International and the other African countries have, is to be able to go beyond what we see, ask why, and be accountable, accountable to the girls. Of course, accountable to the donor, the people that gives us money, but first accountable, accountable to the girls themselves that we intend to walk through within this journey.
I want to close by asking about when, whether it's ever over. When I look at the work the four of you are doing in your various ways, it doesn't seem like there's ever a point at which you're done. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep pressing. You have to keep pushing through people who stand in your way. You have to call out, make accountable those people who work hard to do the minimum compliance, the absolute bare minimum, so that you won't shame them or name them in public or tell the world who they are. On one level, it could be a little discouraging to never be finished, or tremendously empowering and enlivening. I have my guess about the four of you, but how do you keep gas in the tank? Sorry, Mrs. Robinson. How do you keep gas in the tank, and how do you keep pushing forward in a world where you know a lot of the people that you are coming up against want to do the absolute bare minimum they can get away with?
Well, I think what you're hearing probably from the four of us is a passion about what we do. And for me, it's been a kind of progression of human rights, basically. I mean, I learned when I was High Commissioner for Human Rights that basically the Western focus of human rights is very much on civil and political rights, and underestimates the importance of rights to food and safe water, health, education in so many parts of the world where you don't have that. And you know, if you look at the world, I mean, Guru rightly mentioned inequality, inequity. We have such an unequal world. So now I link the human rights development and the threat of climate change and the disruption in the wrong sense of climate shocks that are affecting. So, you know, you wake up energized by the injustice of what's happening and the need to make the world a fairer place, to make a contribution to that. And I think that that's probably what's a common chord between the four of us, a passion for justice, for equality, for being able to make some difference in people's lives, and being able to bring out the potential of people. I heard the word listening a lot, which I think is also very important.
So in the, you know, from Mary told about her law proposal about the right to family planning in Ireland. And as I was a young politician, I saw there were 10, 15% women in the Norwegian parliament. And I said, that's wrong. This has to change. And within 15, 20 years of my time, we had 50% women in the parliament and in the government. Now, I'm saying it because of the contrast between what you see close to yourself in your own society and what you can do there, to what Mary and I and others are now doing with, for instance, Girls Not Brides. When you see what keeps girls and women back in many parts of the world, it is not the type of thing that we had to deal with in my country. It is far more basic. And it goes to the roots of how people still live and what kinds of bad practices and traditions that are keeping people under, you know, pressure for generations. Because these young girls who are 12, who are forced to marry, who bear children, the children they have and the girls they give birth to are easily into the same new generational poverty, you know, roof above them. They cannot grow like the girls that you educate and help educate. So it shows the world has so many facets, and that's why it's never over. You know, you go to Bihar or you go to Ethiopia and see these young people, and you know if it's going to take years and years to change the basis of their lives, it's now they need the help for that change. It's now these communities need to be helped to overcome things which have lived there and people haven't thought about. As you say, it's always been like this. It should be like this in the next generation. No, not in the next generation.
Vera, you've said that you believe that women can thrive even in the worst circumstances. Why do you still believe that with everything that you've seen?
Yes, because I saw the transformation, you know, every day in the organization. For example, a woman came, and when you saw her, as we have a holistic model to promote social inclusion through health, we work in many areas. The first time when you saw the mother, you think, oh, she's hopeless. It's impossible to deal with so many kind of problems. But this holistic approach that we do, not to replace the government, link it to the government, makes a huge difference in their lives. And after 8 months, you see another woman in front of you. And you are also another woman, you know. And it's so, you feel blessed to work. And when I wake up, sometimes I wake up very overwhelmed, I know, tired, but most of the time I feel that is an honor to do what I do. And I think what can I say? What's the name in English? You know, the secret. I think the secret is to celebrate, you know, even small step in the institution, and with the mothers, with the volunteers, all the leaders, the staff, great staff that we have, to celebrate not only the huge accomplishment, like the Skoll Award, but the small ones. So when you see back, you look to your past, and all the leaders of the institution, is a path that you cannot leave.
Well, Vera was looking back over her shoulder. I want you to look down the road. When I go to Tanzania in 5 years, in 10 years, what will I be able to see because more girls go to school?
Independence of the family, power, smiles in the families. You know, the smile of the mother is the smile of the family. Am I not true? So if a mother is happy at home, isn't it everybody is happy? Yes. So it's a smile of a family. It's the policies that are made with the contribution and the information of every gender. It's economic independence, because I think we have seen, you have seen me, right? Will my children need support from Camfed? No. No, I can take my child to school, right? Yes, so by the way, I wasn't supported by Camfed. Camfed was not there by the time I was struggling with the school. But what we do in Camfed is supporting the girls that in 5 years to come, in 10 years to come, they are going to be able to support their families and contribute in the development of the nation itself. And they are going to create an environment where everybody is happy, everybody is confident, and, you know, is not regretting of being born.
Girl power.
Yeah.
Well, speaking for that minority of the human race known as men, I'm glad I was able to be a member of this panel today. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for your attention.
One of the loveliest things about this week has been how prospective it's been, how much we've concentrated on future possibilities and new challenges and things to be done. But we should also recognize that you've done a decade of very hard work. And we'd like to show you a short film about how we got from there to here. We didn't meet to start the forum. We met to talk about this itch that all of us had.
We gathered in a restaurant in Silicon Valley.
At least I think it was a restaurant. It might have been a bar.
Partway into our lunch, we were all writing on the tablecloth and writing on the napkins.
It's one of these classic moments where everybody's talking and throwing out ideas.
And right at the center was this idea of a forward-facing gathering of social entrepreneurs and their allies and champions from all over the world.
The field was about to take off. It needed an identity and it needed a structure. And so we were in kind of a historic moment saying, we have an opportunity to actually make this a movement, not just a collection of individual initiatives.
And who better to take that on than a young business school in the oldest university in the world? No one was more surprised and delighted when 400 people showed up from all over the world.
At that time, the word social entrepreneurship wasn't very common.
I'm like, what am I, a social entrepreneur? What is that?
Business wants to capture a market. Social entrepreneur wants to change the world.
The social entrepreneurs are the innovators, they're the inventors, they're the explorers, if you will.
Solving societal problems with the discipline, the drive, and the disruption of an entrepreneur.
Every year, I really look forward to actually just connecting with people.
And people are doing things on the ground that are changing reality.
People we have never thought we would meet. People that serve other communities in areas that are so far from us.
All that class, caste, hierarchy just falls apart and crumbles here, and it makes you think that anything is possible.
Sweet dreams
One of the classic things that entrepreneurs will tell you in any sphere, in any part of the world, is it's a very lonely business. So it was an explicit part of our intention to make social entrepreneurs feel less lonely.
I'm based in Cambodia. Cambodia is far, far, far away from everything. So coming to the forum is a time where I'm actually not isolated anymore.
I literally know hundreds of people, maybe thousands, who are a part of this sort of global strategy to make the world a better place.
We are at school in the Oxford town, with Jeff in the front of the room, and we're trying to change the world.
You've come here from over 65 countries to share your wisdom, your insights, and your knowledge with us, and for that we're immensely grateful.
The forum is sort of a magical combination of the people, the purpose, and the place.
The forum is a test tube, and you mix all these very interesting little chemicals, and you shake it, you heat it up a little, and you see all these fantastic things that happen.
It's very exciting, the chaos of everything going on.
It's organic, it's something that moves, so it's not one thing, it's 1,000 little things that over time become something much bigger.
I may be walking in the streets of a city called Amsterdam, but the dust on my boots and the rhythm of my feet and my heartbeat say Africa. Say Africa. Say Africa.
The critical thing to move us from A to B is belief.
And we believe that the collective is always much more powerful than individuals.
Collaboration, individual entrepreneurs, businesses, governments, is a necessity.
This is not a job for one side or one sector. We all have a role to play in promoting multicultural responsibility.
This forum is such a great mechanism to sit out at a table and develop a new relationship and say, okay, how can we partner together to move our mission forward?
If Wendy Kopp has just done the best thinking on how you mobilize young people against systemic challenges, and Paul Farmer and his team have done the best thinking about a lay health workforce, and we can build on those, we want to do that. The less we can start from scratch, the faster we will get to our destination.
Sometimes what happens is you are in the discussion which you did not expect, and you hear something that you can connect. I mean, that's how social entrepreneurs, I think, work.
I might have a connection that somebody else didn't know about, somebody else might have an idea that I hadn't thought about.
And some of the ideas are good and some of the ideas are really bad, and it's a really good place to kind of work through that with people who've been down that path before.
It was only by going to the forum that I really began to appreciate the value of scaling my idea, because I was with people who were scaling ideas.
We live in an era in which simply seeking to provide high-quality medical care to the world's poorest is considered innovative and entrepreneurial.
And to follow Paul Farmer, and just to hear him say, the village in Rwanda to which I will be returning tomorrow. I'm going to Paris tomorrow.
We cannot any longer think that climate change is simply something for the future.
We have to squeeze into our ecological footprint a just and meaningful society.
These realities create daunting new challenges, but they also create amazing new opportunities.
Now, inclusion can vanquish intimidation.
Number one priority for young women that age was economic independence.
Impossible, ridiculous things are actually the most doable things, because where there is a gap of impossibility, people leap in.
Like most of you here, I am an optimist. I cannot imagine that our story will not have a happy ending.
We are made for compassion. We're made for caring.
If we imagine, it will happen. If we don't imagine, it will never happen.
Social entrepreneurs are indeed the hope of our future world.
If you look at the body of work and the variety of work and the determination and the obsession and the commitment and just the plain effort it takes to do this stuff, it's not only the highlight of the forum, it's one of my highlights of the year.
When Archbishop Tutu was dancing in the front row and Peter Gabriel was singing anti-apartheid liberation song, that's got to be a peak experience for anybody in the world.
When we started, we were very preoccupied by getting this fledgling movement recognized. That game is over. Okay? There is nobody in government, in policy, in business, in investment who doesn't recognize the centrality of this.
I wouldn't do without coming to the Skoll Forum. Our impact wouldn't be half of what it is now. We wouldn't be reaching 10 million people. We wouldn't be able to work with government in the way we have. We wouldn't have been able to come up with new financial and operational models. And I think that if we're any kind of example, multiply that by the number of social entrepreneurs here, and we're making a big change in the world.
We now know this is real. It can be done. So it's only going to get better.
For the forum community, I think the only limitation we should acknowledge is the limitations of our collective talents and abilities. And between us, I don't think there is a limitation.
This week is such a whirl of ideas and inspiration that it's hard to put one's arm around the whole forum. and harder still to distill all your different experiences into a smooth narrative. So rather than telling you what I think this week meant, I'll remind you of some of the things that you've said. All but one of the quotes that follow are unattributed, and you'll see why. You said, everybody needs a place of friendship and love. You said, growth is strong but ugly. You said, it helps if you like them. You said, act on your dreams just in case they come true. You said, hope is medicine. You said, I was lucky. I had a mother and father who took it for granted that a girl could achieve the same as a boy. You said that there's one psychiatrist in Ghana for every 2 million people with mental illness. You said that 1 in 2 children in Pakistan are not in school. You said, if you don't imagine it, it won't happen. You said, change begins as a slight detour. You said, let's consign pandemics to history books and weapons to antique shops. You said, my involvement is visceral. You said, this madness has a name. You said, I am persistent. You said, stories are data with soul. You said, let's see how strong we are. And from Mushtaq Chopra last night, you said, I am a woman in my heart. This is a truly remarkable thing we've experienced in Oxford this week. Stay connected. Don't let the magic end. And I leave you this year with some thoughts on justice, the key underpinning of pretty much everything you've worked on this week, by the philosopher Ronald Dworkin, who died in February. Justice, he wrote, expands our liberty. It does not cripple enterprise for the sake of cheats. It favors neither big nor small government, but only just government. It is drawn from dignity and aims at dignity. It makes it easier and more likely for each of us to live a good life well. Without dignity, our lives are only blinks of duration. But if we manage to lead a good life well, we create something more. We write a subscript to our mortality. We make our lives tiny diamonds in the cosmic sands. Like the artists who are always already there, you are the tiny diamonds. Thank you. Travel safely. See you here next year.